Councillor Susan Chappell, who is Cabinet Member of the Voluntary Sector, Community and Planning, who is Councillor from Twickenham. Myself, I'm Councillor for East Sheen Ward, so I guess I represent the rough East End of Richmond. Your esteemed chairman, who I'm sure you know, Canon Robert Titley, is going to look after us this evening, and Councillor Stephen Speed, who also represents part of Richmond, North Richmond, who's Cabinet Member for Highways and Transport. Someone will come in breathless off his bike at some point. He's coming straight from work. That will be Councillor Paul Hodgins, who's responsible for schools. Now, the purpose of these meetings is not an intelligence test. You wouldn't come to a meeting of politicians to enjoy an intelligence test or quiz show. People in this room will know more about Richmond than I will ever know, or many people here on the panel. What we're here to do is to listen and to try to answer questions, but we don't intend or pretend that we'll give perfect answers to questions. This is a learning process. I believe profoundly that the boundaries between politicians and those they serve have become too wide and too great. We live in a world of spin and sound bites and emails, and I think whether we like each other or not, whether we have different views, I believe those that serve should come out and meet and answer questions. That's one purpose of this. Second purpose is part of this process, which the Council thinks is extremely important, is trying to get people more involved in having a say in their individual areas. We call this village planning. I'm extremely conscious that Richmond, the most beautiful town in Britain, is not actually a village, but you have to accept the title. There is a village sense about it. The purpose of this is really to try to build up a local plan for the future in which the members of the public will have a strong input. And this is part of that process too. Now, I'll shut up. The question, Canon Titley will explain how it works. It's based on the BBC question time format. There will be some pre-submitted questions, and then some questions that anybody can stand up and ask a question from the floor. We have had no say in choosing the questions. We will try our best to answer them, but do understand that we cannot give a perfect answer to everything, and we will try to give a respectful answer to everything, and we will give a very open ear to everything that's said. So thank you for coming on a cold evening. I'm standing up like sort of Mick Jagger here. Because of the way the microphones are set out, I hope you won't regard it as a discourtesy if people sit, including the chairman, to hear and answer questions. That will enable you, obviously, to hear a little better what's said, or those worthwhile parts of what I hope might be said. So from this point, people will sit down. I'll hand over to Canon Titley to get the evening underway. Thank you for coming.
Lord True, thank you very much indeed. It's a privilege to be chairing tonight. I'm rector of what's known as the Richmond Team Ministry, which is one of two Church of England parishes which serve Richmond town, or indeed village, and its immediate leafy surroundings. And it's wonderful to be able to be of service with a gathering of parishioners and residents such as yourselves tonight. My role is as an independent chair, so my own opinions, whatever they may be, will play no part in tonight's proceedings. My job is to help us to have as good and vigorous a debate as we can with my colleagues on the panel on either side. So I need your cooperation in making sure we do this tonight, not only with vigour, but with courtesy and, yes, with audibility. As you heard from Lord True, we need to make sure not only that we're heard among ourselves tonight in this gathering, but also that the camera which is filming us tonight has a good soundtrack to go with the pictures. So if you're one of the speakers tonight, a microphone will be given to you, and please use it. Follow Lord True in making a Mick Jagger tribute, or treat it as an ice cream cone, whatever works for you. It needs to be close to your lips when you speak, and then you'll be very well heard. One or two housekeeping notices. In addition, the fire exits are the two doors you came in through, one or the other behind you, and the one door to your right as you face the stage here. And should you need the loo or any of the other facilities during the evening, I would suggest you go out of the door to your right, or if you go out of that door, turn left to that corner of the building. They are down the stairs, they're rather a long way, but they are worth the walk. They are rather nice loos here at Duke Street. So don't feel any difficulty if you have to slip out of the meeting at any point. As you've heard, the first hour will be devoted to pre-submitted questions. If you submitted one of those questions, you should have a copy of it with you now. I'll invite you to speak in a particular order, and when I call your name, if you please read out your question exactly as it's on your sheet, which should be exactly as you submitted it. I will then invite panel members to respond. And there will be the opportunity for you as a questioner to offer a supplementary question as well. We have an allocation of 8 minutes per question, so we do need to move along fairly smartly, but if there is time, I'll be happy to throw the floor open for any further questions on that topic. If we keep to time, which I'll do my best to do, we will then have 3/4 of an hour for an open session with questions from the floor. Do please keep them, however, to questions relative to this area of the borough, and please, if you can, give your comments in the form of questions rather than statements, which then invite something more of a conversation with our panel members tonight. Those, I think, are the only stage directions that we need. We come now to the first of the pre-submitted questions from David and Karen McGrath. Are they among us? Sir.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Great. The council claims in its literature that we listened to what you said you would like to see improved in Richmond as part of the village planning programme. Last year, a total of 84 letters were written by Richmond residents in an attempt to stop developers cutting and extending one half of the first building ever constructed on the orchard site at the top of Richmond Hill. The planning department brushed aside these letters in their presentation to the councillors, and the development was approved. My question is, how many letters is it necessary for Richmond residents to write before the council will listen? Thank you.
Councillor Fleming, would you like to come back?
Yes, well, thank you. I am, of course, very familiar with Mr. and Mrs. McGrath's case because I spoke to them at the planning committee and was visited them on a number of occasions to discuss this. I think at the time I did explain that one of the reasons that we're moving forward with the village planning process and providing supplementary planning documents is that at the moment the village plans don't have any credibility when it comes to actual planning matters, and we need to go forward with supplementary planning documents so that those can be embedded into our planning policies. And I know that this is very frustrating. Your representations were certainly listened to by the planning committee. I know what the decision was, I know what a disappointment it was for you, and I'm hugely sympathetic. But I know that as we move forward with the supplementary planning documents, this will be an opportunity to look at the characteristics of the area, and certainly Park Road is one where I know there are, it isn't just your two very unique properties. There are a number of other issues in Park Road where we, which I know I see, I'm sure are going to be raised later on tonight. And I hope that as we go forward with preparing these documents, there are characteristics that will be recognised. But as it stood, this was a decision that was taken by the planning committee.
I don't think it is. Could we check that it's on? Yes, you should be able to.
Oh, okay. I think to say that the councillors were aware of the content of the letters is perhaps not completely convincing, given that all the planning department did at the meeting was to say 84 letters were written. But my question is about the planning department. The planning department received these letters. The planning department claims to listen to people. The planning department paid not the slightest notice of what was written about the proposal, which has now been carried out. There's nothing left of that house except the facade, and actually the front windows were removed this morning. There's nothing left at all, it's just concrete. There's no floors, no ceilings, no cornices, no walls, no doors, nothing.
So your question?
My question is, how many letters do we have to write to the planning department before the planning department will take into account what is said by residents of Richmond, lots of them, all very concerned about what was being done last year? Or has the listening only just started?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, as I said, this was referred to planning committee, and so the decision was made by the planning committee. If, I mean, the point you're making now, and I will ask my colleague, Councillor Chapman, to also comment, but if you are now saying that the development that's being carried out is not in accordance with the plans that were agreed, then that is a matter that certainly can be referred to the planning department.
I mean, I think you asked a very specific question about how many letters does it take before we listen. I have to say that it's not the number of letters. It's purely on planning grounds, and the councillors, I sit on planning a lot, and one of the things that I always make sure I do, and I'm sure all the other councillors do, is to have a look online and make sure that I really understand the issues. It is very difficult, and I have been frustrated on behalf of my residents sometimes when I know the area very, very well. I know how strongly they feel about it, but for whatever reason, there just aren't planning grounds that are able to give us the authority, if you like, to refuse something. And as Councillor Fleming said, that's one of the primary reasons for what we're doing at the moment, is to really embed into our planning policy all those things that you think are the most important in your area. And I can assure you that that will have teeth, and that will be listened to by all members of the planning committee.
One comment, please. No, just one very quickly.
Sorry, I'm afraid we have to move on, otherwise we're going to be late.
What's the point in writing in at all? The planners know the grounds. Why should residents write in and say that they're unhappy? Why would that matter?
It absolutely does, and not just writing in, but also making representations, because often you can think that you've understood a planning application. When you hear somebody speak, they just tweak something in your mind that makes you ask a question, that makes you question whether or not it should be given permission or refusal, or indeed whether you agree with the recommendation that the officers make. So please, 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 it really does make a huge difference.
Thank you. May I move on to the second question, which is Francis Bouchier. And could Francis have the microphone? Centre, second, third row.
While she is having the microphone here, it's Councillor Hodgins, not breathless, as I said. He's so fit he can ride across London on a bike and drive in such a clock.
I do apologise.
So, my question actually is about enhancing Richmond for elderly residents. Yes. Well, actually, I can't hear any of you. I haven't heard Councillor Fleming at all. This hall, we do desperately need a decent community centre, because this hall is incredibly expensive, can't be used by voluntary organisations, and is very bad for elderly people to hear. But
yes, if you'd like to text to your question.
And I'll come to it with a mini brief. Alderman Meadows gave Meadows Hall site to the council many years ago for elderly people or older residents' use. This hall was shut over 3 years ago, is totally derelict, and Richmond has no social centre for elderly people or a community room, which Meadows Hall was used for very happily every night. Can you tell me if the council would consider talking to interested parties to establish a social centre, which would act as a community hall, and extra care, which is also desperately needed in Richmond, on this site, or devote the proceeds of the sale to establishing one elsewhere in central Richmond, thus talking to interested parties, which I know exist to do that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Francis. By the way, Francis said nobody could hear what Pamela and Susan were saying on the first question. Is that a problem? Because we need to make sure the microphones are working. Okay. Francis, it's good to see you, and I would like to say that your service as a councillor in Richmond over many years, I'm sure is very well known to most people here, and also your role as older person's champion when you were on the council alongside so many other voluntary activities, and it would be wrong in this public forum not to thank you on behalf of the council for all that you have done and do in that. It's lovely to see you looking very well, not weighed down by council cares. The question you ask obviously is very important, and it goes to the heart of how we sustain communities, and also how we involve active older people in the community, in doing things, engaging their talents and providing opportunities. I always say to young people, you are just old people in waiting. And it's equally easy to forget that older people are still young people at heart and have a tremendous amount to give to each other in the community. The question of a community hall, obviously for the vulnerable elderly, that is an absolutely, the people who are not so self-sufficient, that is something which is not only dealt with by bricks and mortar. We've commissioned independent living service in this area to undertake a range of work to try and find ways of supporting older people to live in the community and to combat loneliness and to address these problems. The question you're asking is about bricks and mortar. The issues about bricks and mortar relate in part to the overall financial position of this council or any other. We estimate that we will have to save somewhere approaching £30 million from the council's budget, which is currently £165 million, over the next 4 years. In those circumstances, with the many pressures on the council, I can't commit in the way you ask to say that we can sustain or build a new facility. I also do think that while a social centre is a very important provision, there are many other ways in which people can network and be together in the modern world, which we should seek to encourage. You ask whether we would talk to interested parties with ideas, and the answer is yes, I mean, of course. But I don't believe in being misleading, and I'm not going to say the council would be able to find the funds to sustain a particular building, reopen it, or build a new one at the moment.
Thank you. We have 3 minutes for a supplementary and an answer. No supplementary. Would anyone else on the panel like to comment? Is there someone from the floor who would like to add anything very briefly to this question? Yes, lady, a few rows back. Can you wait till the microphone arrives? Here comes one from behind you, as at the pantomime.
I think that the centre for the elderly, any elderly, is very important for people to get out and about. And I know from my own mother, who used to go to a day centre, that it was a crucial part of her week to be able to go somewhere different and to be with other people. Now, the council tax in this area has been frozen for the last 4 years. Why could you not consider an increase in the council tax to fund such a worthy cause as a centre for the elderly?
Well, it's a challenging question. I mean, there are, you only have to look at me to know that very recently I've had the experience of the older generation in my family confronting the same issues that are being discussed here, how you sustain contact. And certainly I agree that the social centre is one way. There are many other older people who don't particularly choose that route and choose to meet and go to other places and other activities. You ask about the council tax. When I had the privilege of becoming leader of the council, we had, and we still do have, one of the highest council taxes in the country. And actually, with older people in fixed incomes and mine, among others, I took the view that we should seek to hold down council tax. We have done, and most residents surveys say that's a popular policy. And at the moment we intend to sustain it. But it follows from what I've said about the financial pressures. We're not looking at plus numbers, we're looking at minus numbers. That we will either have to reduce our spending further or at some point come to the public and put the case for an increase in council tax. At the moment, that is not our intention. I think the country still experiences great difficulty, a lot of people in finding a hard time in this country, and I don't want to come and ask for higher council tax. But I'd be kidding you if I didn't say that, that debate, you rightly put the question, will have to be held. But the public will have to have a say and feel for that. But all those considerations are in mind.
Thank you. Our third question from Charles Penless, please.
My question concerns contemporary architecture in the town. The policy of the Development Management Plan, HA2, since 2011, has demanded that buildings reflect the local architecture. And consequently, we've noticed an increasing use of this clause to stifle well-designed good architecture, which would leave a valuable stamp on the townscape in exchange for the current prestiges. Would it be possible in some way to modify this rather hard stance?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. And it is a point that has been raised on a couple of occasions. In fact, the last one at the Village Group Forum, in fact it was in relation to Kew, but generally. And something that we were asked if we would reflect when we're doing the supplementary planning documents, that we do need to make sure that we are also looking at, good modern architecture. The policy that you're referring to, there is also, if you look at 617, that also does say that it should also be noted that new design does not have to imitate architectural forms or features, but should recognise the rhythm, height, proportion, and plot relationships of existing properties. So I think there is some flexibility there, but as we go forward with the SPDs, we do need to consider the point you make, because there does need to be a legacy of 21st century architecture. I don't know if Councillor Chappell would like to add anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things, it's always a balance, isn't it? And you have to decide what is good modern architecture and what is not. And if you have, I'm thinking particularly of my ward, if you have a row of Edwardian or Victorian houses, you have to be very careful if you step too far away from those, because it can be very jarring. And so we always have to take that view that very, very good modern architecture can look fantastic, but you particularly talk about infills. And infills is something which a lot of residents get very upset about. They feel very strongly that it can affect the rhythm and the tone of the road. And so I think with all things in planning, it's balance. But certainly if there are particular roads where you feel modern architecture would work, this is the opportunity to raise them, and we will listen very carefully to that.
Charles, brief supplementary.
Yes. Could I have the switch on?
It's on, yeah.
I was actually thinking most specifically of a project going through at the moment in Richmond Circus. It is right beside the tyre place, which is not an architectural gem that I would like to see reproduced. It is extremely high-grade dominant install design, and it's been laughed out of court by conservation. And that is a classic. You enter the town on that roundabout, you have a brand new, well-designed, beautiful building, and we go for pastiche.
Well, I agree about the entrance to the town there is very, 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 very important. And I think, I don't know if Susan wants to add anything, but I think this is something that we will certainly discuss with planners, because I think it's, you know, it's a very valid point. But we do have to be very careful, because of, you know, residents' views about architecture, and particularly in a place like Richmond.
Might just come in briefly. I mean, it is Richmond Riverside is pastiche in the term, which is pejoratively used sometimes. And pastiche, I know you're not using it in that sense, can be, we don't actually really like architecture that reproduces earlier forms. That's the whole history of architecture is challenge and response and responding to past forms. And sometimes that's done by revolutionary and different development. That's the kind of thing you have in mind. Marginally, not totally revolutionary. These are both philosophical and practical questions, but one of the purposes, as our colleagues have said, of having a village plan, if there are areas in the borough or within sections of the borough where it emerges in the discussions on the kind of the emerging village plan, the SPDs and the jargon, that people think, yes, this is an area where we could go for some exciting new forms, then I would hope that that could come out of this process, either in this first round or in the future. I don't think anyone rules it out, but equally I'm not necessarily disparaging of good pastiche. I mean, as I say, in that centuries of high quality British architecture were just that.
Thank you very much. Our fourth question is from John Gavett.
My question relates to cycling along the towpath in Richmond, and it's in the interest of pedestrian safety, and particularly that of children. I'd like to urge the Council to introduce a well-signed 10 km/h speed limit for cyclists along the towpath between Twickenham Bridge and Petersham Meadows along the Surrey bank.
Well, I assume you're concerned about the fact that cyclists are probably going too fast out there, and in that regard you would not be alone. And there are plenty of people who feel that it is an amenity, it's a shared amenity with pedestrians and dog walkers and so on. And from that point of view, cyclists going too fast is a concern for a lot of people. But the problem that we have is that responsibility for the towpaths is a very messy business. Shared between the PLA, the Environment Agency, and the Council actually has responsibility for some of it in terms of maintaining the surface, but we don't have a complete free hand in terms of being able to put signage up and control cyclists in that way. In fact, cyclists technically are not permitted to use the towpaths for that purpose, which also adds to the problem that we can't put signs up which would effectively be condoning cycling. So on that basis, we've taken the sort of expedient view of turning our back on it and effectively allowing it to happen. And that's not a great answer from your point of view, but it is a very difficult situation. Legally, we are in a position where we can say to people, is a speed limit, because in theory they're not allowed to cycle, but we don't discourage people necessarily from cycling because it is a good place to get out. It is a healthy activity to do, so it's a difficult situation. I don't know what's for it.
Supplementary, yes.
Signs which say priority to pedestrians presumably wouldn't be overstepping your powers by having clear signs along that stretch saying that pedestrians have priority over cyclists.
I think it's fair to say that the pedestrians have the priority over the cyclists automatically. That is the status of the towpath. But I'm also conscious of the stretch that you referred to, of course, includes Richmond Riverside, and that's a heavily used part. And on that basis, what I'd like to do is take it away and see what we might be able to do in terms of putting that sort of signage and making sure that it's in the right sort of places, with a view to saying, be courteous, cyclists, be courteous to pedestrians.
We have a minute or two in hand. Is there a supplementary question from the floor? Yes, sir. Just wait for the microphone to come on. We're fine.
We had a talk here not so long ago from Jason Debney, who reiterated the point that cycling is not allowed on the towpath, but he also said that cycling is going to be allowed on the towpath, and that change is coming. Is that something you've heard of, or is it just in his imagination?
You can tell by my quizzical look that it's not something I've heard of. I will have to investigate that. That is news to me.
Thank you. Our fifth question. Oh, sorry.
No, we'll look into that. I mean, there is obviously a lot of pressure from both the cyclists and actually coming down from the Mayor of London to open up all sorts of through routes for cycling which avoid roads, and it may well be that there is part of that function, but we'll certainly look into it and find out. It's not a policy that I particularly personally tick to, I would say.
Lord Chair actually has a good point there, that there is a proposal from TfL to include part of the towpath as one of the quiet ways, so conceivably Jason's been talking about that, conceivably. But let me say that those quiet ways are not actually agreed to as yet.
Thank you. We need to move to our fifth question, I'm afraid, which is from Peter Willen.
Hello, can you hear me? My question relates to the short, medium and longer term use of Richmond town. To what extent, if at all, should the town be promoted as a resort and tourist attraction with, for example, an increasing number of events, commercialisation of the town's open spaces and expanded evening economy? And the question goes on, what is the impact on the economic and environmental sustainability and the character of the town? And what is an acceptable balance for all those who live, work and visit the town? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And first of all, I would like to thank Mr. Willen for all he does for the town, because he does work very hard, and although we don't always agree, I do have a lot of respect for the points that he makes. And indeed, it's always very useful, even to have these issues highlighted. I think the point is that Richmond is, and always has been, a tourist town. It's royal connections, great culture, we've got wonderful theatres, natural assets. And I think it's right that we should share these. And we want to attract people to the area. But of course, it has to be give and take, and this must be done with mutual respect for residents as well. But the residents and the community as a whole does benefit from the tourist trade. It does mean that we keep our shops, we have their shops, restaurants, all of these things. I think the community of itself values greatly. And during the recent downturn, I mean, Richmond has actually managed to survive extremely well. And I think that the businesses do value the events that we try to put on. And I mean, the Mayfair is put on, I see Liz Karen here, but the Mayfair is a hugely popular event that showcases Richmond for people. So all of this must be done, of course, in partnership with residents and residents of the town. And when I talk about Richmond, I do mean not just the town, because Richmond is wider than just the town. But it must be done, you know, with respect, with care. And I think the council has almost recognised that this must be the case. So, yes, we want to promote Richmond, and I think it should be promoted. It would be a shame not to take that sort of advantage, but we must also respect residents' views.
Have you a supplementary?
Yes, I'll do a quick one. Thank you, Andrew, for that. I mean, it is the balance. I wasn't in any sense suggesting that we shouldn't be promoting the town for the benefit of everybody. It's where the balance lies. And as you know, I'm particularly concerned with the evening economy and the difficulties we have. And it does feel as though often we're firefighting. I mean, there's a trend at the moment. We have something like 28 sandwich bars or equivalent in the town. One after the other is now seeking an alcohol license. These are retail shops. And so we're into battle on that, if you like, as residents, to try and keep the balance. So there is a long-term future. I hope we can sort of keep to. Thank you very much.
Yeah, maybe if I can pick up on that, because I have a slightly different hat on from when I was chair of licensing, and I think it is something that's hugely important. And Mr. William will know the battles we've had with certain establishments in Richmond who have probably gone too far, and I think that we have reached that balance, and I think that the council is very aware of making sure that the nighttime economy is not just for those who come into Richmond, but is right for the residents who have to live in Richmond and who want to enjoy the peace and quiet, particularly I think around the Green. And they want to know that whilst there are those things that they can go to and enjoy, they can actually come home and have a good night's sleep. And I think that everybody who sits on licensing, and regrettably I don't anymore, but we do understand how important it is.
We can arrange that.
And I representing Twickenham Riverside, which is Twickenham Town Centre, we have the same issues, and it is always a balance. We do want to encourage those shops and those businesses who are going to bring life to an area, but not those that aren't going to respect local residents. And I believe we've got the balance right, and I think we've gone a long way to making it even better in the past 4 years, and I promise we'll continue to do it.
So I could just add briefly, I mustn't say too much, but this is really finding this sort of balance within a community is what I hope this village planning process will be about. Towns that are successful have to have life. I saw somebody coming in carrying a Whole Foods bag. You know, we need to have new shops and places that people want. I'm lucky enough, I go every year to teach a medieval history course in Venice, and I'm going there next week. Perish the thought that, you know, we should ever have a beautiful town hollowed out with nobody much living there, no butcher's shops, and no lively high street, just mass shops, tourists and bars. We don't want that to happen. It can happen. We need to watch the balance, and that the community are the best people to watch the balance, and please help us in this.
This is a question with quite wide implications. Are there any other questions from the floor that you'd like to exercise our panel with? Yes, ma'am. Just here.
Hello. I just wanted to ask why there's so little provision at Christmas time for example, the Christmas lights, because you go to visit other villages round about, and there's lots of lovely lights up. And this year I was coming out of the station, I heard several people saying, well, where are the lights? We've come in specially and there's nothing going on. And that was an opportunity to, tastefully draw people into Richmond to do a bit of shopping, and it seems that we don't ever seem to have any.
I agree with that, but there's a technical answer to that, which I think Pamela, as local council, can tell you. I'd love to see lights and Christmas feeling everywhere.
Well, yes, I mean, we do work very hard. As you know, the alleyways all have lights, and we had some in Eaton Street this year for the first time, up on the hill, and we do have a Christmas event, which is well attended. The trouble with George Street is twofold, really. Firstly, they're all chain stores, or majority of them are chain stores, I should qualify, and they don't and aren't prepared to contribute to the Christmas lights. Because it's difficult, because of course they've all got them at their head office, or they have their local charities, their local organisations. But there's also actually a technical problem that we've got no lamp colours in George Street. So you can't put the star lights and things as we have done elsewhere. But we did actually, this did come up at our last meeting of the Richmond Business and Retail Alliance, and we are going to explore this year with some of the chain stores to see whether they'd be prepared to put up some small Christmas trees. It is quite difficult because they're very high buildings and not all of them have wayleaves, and it's going to be, but I think if we could get something more in George Street, it would be wonderful. We have, I must add, since we paved over the station, we have put, the council has put a Christmas tree there, and of course there's a big Christmas tree in front of, well, by Whole Foods, which I must say was Peachtree Nursery was donated this year. So we do our best, and the council puts in funding not just to Richmond, but to lights across the whole borough. But there is a problem with George Street.
Yes, no, I wasn't talking about, the sort of London effect of having things streamed across the roadway, which I recognise would be expensive and difficult. But yes, a few Christmas trees would be nice.
Thank you. Let's go to question number 6, which is from Paul Street.
Hello, I'm asking a question on behalf of Mrs. Rachel Dixon, who can't come. The current provision and advertisement and public convenience provision for the general public in Richmond and Richmond Hill is inadequate. What is the current situation and how might it be improved?
Yes. I know. We do have a community toilet scheme, and we are seeking to extend that. It does actually work quite well, but the problem is that people coming into the town don't know where those community toilets are. They've got stickers, but you've actually got to know, you've got to find out where they are. So we are at the moment looking at a programme, first for extending the number of businesses, and we do pay the businesses, and we are prepared to increase that. To pay the businesses, we continue to do that, and to increase the number of businesses that participate in the community toilet scheme. And to also seek a better way of publicising the location of those toilets. Even at its most simple, if we have a notice on the community notice board, but also, of course, at the station information point, which is soon to be spruced up and have a proper kiosk. So they will both be ways, but every way we can think of to publicise exactly where those are, and we want to increase the number. Yes, it's a problem not just in Richmond, but in Twickenham, in Witton, and everywhere. We do need to increase the number of businesses that are providing that facility. It's extremely important, and particularly if we want to encourage older people to use our town centres. I know that a lot of them just don't like going out because they're not sure where they're going to go to the loo. So it's very important if we want our older people to use town centres that we do more on this, and it's a priority for the council.
Any other members of the panel would like to respond?
No, like others, I have vested interest in seeing this policy work. I mean, it was brought in 2002, it's a long time ago, and I think it's time for a re-go at getting people to take part, and that, as Pamela said, is what we will do. I find it a bit odd, actually, that you can go into a store where everybody knows there's a convenience and it's for staff only. It's not as if dozens of folk are piling up. I think perhaps sometimes those who trade could show a little bit more social responsibility. And actually, having mentioned in Italy, if you run a bar or cafe, you have by law to enable somebody who comes in to use a toilet at convenience. I don't think we should go to that draconian regulation, but it's a bit of you know, we have to just help each other, and I think there's a bit of social responsibility in that as well, which I would urge those who have these facilities to think whether they should always bar people from using them. But we will push the community scheme. Thank you for raising this very, very important point.
Supplementary.
The only thought that occurs is that, like many things, just setting up a community scheme is one thing, and keeping it running, particularly when businesses come along and drop out and things like that, isn't it? Maybe you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely right. And it does need following up all the time. And I think that that's what we have to do, and make sure this time there is a good system in place that once a year, you know, businesses are invited to reapply and to continue providing that service. So I agree, it's important that we take this on board. Yeah.
And I think we have time to take one question at least from the floor and towards the back there. Thank you. Just check it's on. Yes, I think we're fine.
Can I just say?
No, we're not.
No. Yes.
Yes.
The community toilet where I live is in a pub, which is not somewhere that I would feel comfortable to go. And I think that quite a few of them are located in pubs. That means that they're not open for most of the morning, and they're not comfortable places for a lot of people to visit.
Thank you.
Very good point. I agree with that.
Well, we do need to have a wide variety. I mean, there are cafes as well. There are quite a number of cafes around who also participate. But I agree. It isn't just pubs. It's cafes, shops as well. Yeah, very important.
And the old town hall.
That comment was the old town hall.
Well,
the old town hall.
Yes.
We can't hear you, so I'll relate this one remark of yours through my microphone, and then we'll move on.
The old town hall toilets were closed. There is, of course, still one there, I think, from the library that you can use, that the library provides there. Those were closed back in, I don't know, like 2007? Yeah. Without any, yes, they were closed back in 2010. They weren't, of course, fit for purpose, so that's it.
Thank you very much. Question number 7 from Paul Vedaway, who is to the right.
Given the implications of the falling in of the leases covering a substantial part of the Old Deer Park early next year, the significant development and other issues relating to the future of the park that are likely to arise in the near future this year, and the continuing and urgent need for the effective planning and management of the entire park, would there not be the advantage of progressing a plan for the conservation and enhancement of the park in its own right, in parallel with or ahead of the village plan for Richmond, as recommended by the Old Deer Park Working Group since June 2012?
Yes, absolutely. And as part of the supplementary and the village planning process and the supplementary planning document, we will actually be drawing up a complete planning brief for Old Deer Park. And whereas for the supplementary planning document consultations, we are actually going, because of the general election hurdle, we have to really wait to do quite a lot of the consultation until after the election, we can actually continue with that work. So we have employed consultants, and we will be arranging meetings, and we will be looking at that planning brief right the way, now, so that it's ready to consult on when we embark on the main village planning programme.
Or supplementary, if you like, yes.
Well, welcoming that, but we're running a bit late because major applications are going to be rolling in the next few months, and somebody's been arguing for this plan for some considerable time. And really, your officers have been blocking every real attempt to look at and review the planning context and to prepare themselves for quite significant proposals which are going to be rolling in very soon. Can we have an assurance at least the council will lead the way by sorting out dereliction, decay, and their own unauthorised development in the park, and leading the way for the Crown Estate and the other lessees?
Well, we certainly will. I mean, this will all be part of the planning, the consultation, the work that we'll be undertaking. I think we have had meetings. In fact, we had a meeting back, I think this is September, but we have certainly had meetings with you to discuss this. Indeed, Mr. Willem, Mr. Pinellas, and Paul, you were there as well. So I think it's perhaps a little bit unfair to say that officers are blocking ideas. We've considered ideas and continue to do that. And I know, in fact, that the officers responsible on the village planning process have been reading all the various documents, because I've had 1 or 2 conversations with them. So we will be in touch and we will be involving you. Yeah.
I think, if I may, I did hear, I mean, you and I have been present at a meeting discussing this. It is a very important matter, of course, and it's historically a tragedy that we have that road gashing through, separating the old deer park from the town, and also that the approach from the old deer park to the town is sort of dismal 1960s Northampton style parts of it. So I mean there are very important issues. I think I heard Pamela say that we would be carrying forward the work on the deer park discussions, not stopping for the general election third, and I sincerely hope I did hear that right. We must do that. Really, Paul, Mr. Vedway, and all, please input.
Thank you. Has anyone else from the floor a question relating to Old Deer Park and planning? Can we just see if we have someone hitherto silent who'd like to say something? No? We are with you, madam. You need to get the microphone first, though. You have the talking stick.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about how you decide things such as footpaths there, because I live just the other side of Old Deer Park, and there is no footpath from the athletic ground to the back of the Old Deer Park and the children's playground there, which is where I take my daughter's dog and my grandson often, and you have to walk along the road with the buses coming out. Otherwise you've got to walk all the way along and down the far side of the swimming baths. So there isn't any footpath at all. I wonder whether there were any plans to perhaps put one in, because it's very unsafe.
Okay, well, thanks. Others will comment no better than I do. As I said, this isn't a question, a quiz. I don't know the answer to that. But fortunately this is being recorded and everything point that's being made is being noted, so we won't take that away.
Thank you very much. Our 8th and final question of the pre-submitted questions is from Lindsay Blank. Strike 3.
Thank you. My question concerns the provision of educational places. I know from personal experience the difficulty of getting my grandson into any of his chosen 6 schools choices, and he didn't get any of them, as now. But I wonder if there's the need for more provision for schools in Richmond area, and is there any potential for possibly reusing or changing views for the former magistrates' court? Because I understand that it's underused at the moment. And just as a comment, it seems that the school provision is being biased either towards church schools or towards Twickenham very often. And there is a kind of an area where there's a gap, which is that Old Deer Park, lower end of the town. Okay?
Thank you for that. Let me say, to answer the question directly, you're absolutely right. There is a need for more provision. This month we just published an updated long-term plan for school place provision across the borough, and have done it area by area, and have identified a need here. The Educational Funding Agency, which is the central agency that funds new free schools, has been in touch with the Ministry of Justice about the Magistrates' Court, and they've said that they don't have any plans to vacate it. But they will, and we will continue those discussions. But I can say, I don't know if you've seen the publicity about the new Deer Park School, and today they just announced the site of that, for the long-term site, which is on Mortlake Road, between the 2 roundabouts. So that will add 2 forms of entry from this September, permanent forms of entry. We have we're just finishing the expansion of the vineyard, and we will also be still working on a new free school just across the bridge in Twickenham. There's been talk about Ride House. I'd love to see a school at Ride House. That would help in this area as well. But we are continuing to look. There is going to be need further down the road, and we're looking at all options, including creative options. But it's great to hear ideas. Our officers do know the area well, but many residents know it even better. So if there are other ideas that you've got, then please feed them back. But that's an example of one that we have investigated, and it is a big part of my job to be planning for school places. We've added over 500 places over the last 4 years. Our new plan will add over 21 forms of entry across the board over the next few years, but we will be continually reviewing it.
I know how difficult it is, and you can't conjure space out of nowhere, but it just seems, whether it's true or not, it seems that a lot of the places are going towards Twickenham, and I know that people in Richmond tend to rent or buy somewhere near the schools, and then they move to Twickenham very often.
Yeah.
So I know there's not much.
Twickenham is an area of need, so is Richmond. As I say, good news today, which you'll hopefully see later, is about Deer Park School in the area to add more provision.
And that's on the website, is it? The plans, I mean, where that's going to be? And
It is. I'll just have to check. It just came out today, so the press release will go up if it hasn't already.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I probably could come in on the borough-wide thing. I mean, it is difficult. You're kind to acknowledge that. It has been the main priority that we've actually set. We've spent an enormous amount on education and investing in green sixth forms to borough schools, which was something that we promised we would do and have done. Councils don't have the authority. We have the responsibility, statutory responsibility, to provide school places. But under the, frankly, a rather silly law that we have now, I'm actually in favour of free schools, people coming forward and proposing schools, and some of these new schools are coming from that. But I really think councils should be more actively involved in helping to plan where they go. And I think foolishly the government's rather taken councils too much out of it. Fortunately, because good work of our officers, good work of Paul Hodgins, the work we've done with the council, we are now cooperating very actively with the government, and we're cooperating and trying to find places. Twickenham has been historically one of the places with a shortage of places. Central Richmond is another. Another's actually the area that I represent, Central East Sheen, where we've a new free school now there, opening Thompson House opened. Within the constraints, what is actually going to happen? Nobody's actually agreed, as far as I know, to this, but we're told the population of London will grow to 11 million. If the population of London grows to 11 million, ipso facto, the population of this borough will grow, and the need will come. And we will have to accept schools coming in places that are not always the most obvious or the most convenient, but we're acutely conscious that central Richmond is a difficult area. It's just find us the building. I imagine it's Paul's great idea. I'm glad to know Paul is also on the job, but please don't think we're not conscious of the need in Richmond.
And again, Madam, if I can ask if there's someone who hasn't spoken yet who'd like to address the questions to the schools issue. One there, and then we'll take the lady at the back.
Quick question on schools. If we're going to do primary schools, which is where there's the acute shortage, you need to plan forward for the secondary schools, because I think that's going to be an even bigger issue. I don't know where you're going to put another secondary school in the borough. You need one or two if you're going to go to a population of 11 million in London.
So you're absolutely right. This big bubble is going up. There are two new schools coming in on the Twickenham side. So there is Touring House, which we're working with and is likely to come in September. And you may also have seen on the side of Richmond College there will be a new school coming in 2017. For the size of the secondary school, there are fewer obvious places on the Richmond side of the river. There may be longer term opportunities with the development of Mortlake Brewery, for example. We will have to see. But you're right. This year as well, there's a new school in North Kingston going in, which will take some of the pressure off of Greycourt School to open up places a bit wider within the borough. And these things have a knock-on effect. But you're right, when bubble comes up, we are adding more secondary places. But because of the size of secondary schools, it becomes even more difficult to find places, especially centrally.
Thank you. And a last supplementary.
Sorry,
yes.
I'm fascinated to hear that you're having trouble finding places to build schools. The school where I live, which you're very familiar with, the Russell School, rather than expanding the school, you've decided to sell off huge chunks of it for housing. How does that help you find school places? The school is ideal to expand. It's one form entry. It could quite easily be expanded to 2, 3, even 4. Instead, you're selling a third of it off.
No, so the Russell School is actually being expanded, and we've identified it in our longer-term strategy that it will go to, with consultation with the school, to a full 2 forms of entry. We're also looking in Ham. There are 3 schools in Ham and Petersham, and they're also candidates for expansion as well. The development that goes together with that expansion, which has to do with Strathmore School as well, is also about finding funding in order to provide more and updated facilities for special needs. But as I say, we are expanding in Russell as well.
You just asked me. Yes. I have an announcement. Can you please make sure that you give panel members their details if you want to be kept informed about village planning and later events? We have 2 sets of sign-in sheets going around, but we want to make sure that everyone has seen it, and they can come and speak to Pamela at the end of the evening if they haven't. And yes, I can see the sign-up sheets being waved at the back, so they are among us. Thank you very much. Well, thank you. We have now, in a moment, our second half of the evening, which is can we please, in the first instance, steer clear of topics we've not covered in the first part of the evening? If we've exhausted those questions and we've still got some time, my panel members here say they'd be very happy to look at some of the material we've touched on earlier this evening. But let's begin, if we may, with questions that break fresh ground. Lady at the very front here, followed by a gentleman in about row 5. First of all, you must have a microphone first, and here it comes. Thank you.
My question is,
could you hold it up a little?
What's the point of a conservation area unless it conserves and protects the good aspects in the area? I say this because I live in Park Road, Richmond, which is a conservation area. The pattern of the road is pairs of semi-detached houses, which are buildings of townscape merit, and in between each pair of houses there's a gap through which you can see sky and trees in the gardens behind. Unfortunately, some newcomers come and want to fill in these gaps to make an additional room, or sellers make an extra £1,000 or 2. We had a petition last year, and 99% of residents in Park Road signed it to keep these gaps, which make it a countrified road, not an urbanised road of terraced houses.
Can I move you to your question?
Well, one of the people who signed the petition said, what's the point of a conservation area if it doesn't conserve and protect the good things in that area? And we sent a petition to Lord True, but we didn't get a reply at the time, so perhaps we do so now. So we say please to the council, please save these gaps for us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Who would like to bat first?
Can I just just because I'm very familiar with this, because I've also spoken to planning on another case quite recently, which we were successful actually in overturning the application for the infill there, filling that gap. But of course they've gone to appeal, and we don't know what's going to happen. But I have already said, because this is exactly again what the supplementary planning documents will do, because that needs to preserve the character. And I have said that I think this is a road we should look at for putting Article 4 directions, whether we can do it or not, for that particular feature. So anyway, I'll hand over to Councillor Chapman.
This is something
Be
that...
able to just say, well, it's a conservation area and no argument.
I mean, what we can't do is stop people putting in inappropriate developments. What we have to do is exactly that, is we have to preserve and protect conservation areas, and indeed other areas. I don't live in a conservation area, I live in a road very similar to yours, which is semi-detached with gaps. And I absolutely agree with you that we need to preserve the character of our roads. And I think that that's something that our policies do. We have very specific policies on that, particularly with regard to infill, where we do need to respect the character and the form, the building line of roads. And that's something that I, for one, feel very strongly about. And certainly when I'm sitting on a planning committee, it's something that I will do my best to protect.
I mean, I should respond briefly. I mean, of course, we get many petitions, including yours. Actually, planning applications are, and parking are the two things the council gets most petitions about. I fully agree with what colleagues have said. Conservation area doesn't give total protection. Hopefully this process of village planning will increase the protection, but ultimately it comes down to a judgment that's made by the planning committee under advice on the day. We also have to be conscious that, I found myself in Parliament not so long ago leading a revolt against the government to protect the right of neighbours to comment on proposals which are being made by their neighbours. The government intended to restrict that very severely. I found the odd situation of standing in the lobby in the House of Lords, and the first people voting for me were John Prescott and Neil Kinnock, which I certainly hadn't expected ever to happen in my life. But the climate of the times, and we're back to the 11 million, the pressure that's coming from governments and political parties and from the top is let them build. What Richmond Council wants to do, as far as we can, is to at least give ourselves more weapons than others to try to exercise some control. That's the first general point I've made. Second general point is, once upon a time, when people want to move on, they move from one house, they move to a larger house. Now, in my view, because of the penal rates of stamp duty largely, which weigh very heavily in a borough where house prices are larger, it costs less to do an extension than it does to move. So the whole pressure is on, economic pressure is to try for an extension, and that we have to confront this. People's behaviour has changed. But these are very important decisions.
Thank you. Gentleman on the audience right, and then a lady on the left here in the red jacket. No, she's been picked to the post by the lady in the brown jacket. Third row. Sir.
Sorry, I was speaking now. Subterranean development, commonly known as basements. From January 2015, Kensington and Chelsea have a revised basement policy. My question is, when will Richmond include in the Richmond Village Plan a similar policy, following the growing number of planning applications for basement construction under Victorian terrace properties? I've got particularly in mind 2 up, 2 down terrace cottages of townscape merit in conservation areas. Also, Kensington and Chelsea say that they can actually refuse basement development applications under listed buildings. My point is that if councils can have the powers to do this, it's not very far to move to have similar powers for terraced cottages of townscape merit.
Thank you.
This is a very tricky one, and it's something that comes up a lot. The situation is that we're constantly reviewing the way in which we deal with basement properties. It is a very tricky issue. Again, it comes back to what Lord True was saying, that people aren't moving. They're trying to build up or down, or wherever they can find space. And it is a particularly difficult issue, I think, probably more so on this side of the borough. I don't see very many in my ward, because people are very concerned about what this is going to do to the road, to the look of the road, to whether there's going to be any flooding implications. And often, if you're talking about a listed building or a building that's very old, is this going to affect not just the foundations of that property, but also the foundations of the properties around it? So it's certainly something as a council that we're constantly looking to review and update. And something I think that we do need to reflect as we move forward on the SPDs for this and every other area, so that we do listen to what residents say, and we act within the guidelines that we have to move to a situation which allows responsible development, but doesn't allow it to get completely out of hand.
May I just sort of chip in? That there is on the website, we have had a study done on this, and the report is on the website, and there are some recommendations, and we are, I think, in the process of going to, in fact, sort of introducing like a policy and sort of checklists. So we'll be looking at this. Sorry, is it later on this year? Did we say? Yeah, later on this year. Yes, because we have discussed this. Yeah.
I have been talking at national level with other local authority leaders, including Kensington, and with the government. And we have been trying to put some pressure on the government to actually legislate specifically in this area. The department's view is that it's not necessary, and it probably can be dealt with through local planning provision. There is actually a draft bill to give councils power on this, but there's really no prospect of that making any progress. So we, following, as Pamela said, the work that's underway, and we will keep this before the planning officers. I do understand the concern there is. Barnes is a big issue there too.
Thank you. Supplementary question?
Reassuring, but I think it is becoming a growing problem and of concern, and it affects every aspect of planning that will be reflected in the Richmond Village Plan, and especially the supplementary planning document. If there are powers that are available to councils, I plead that they should actually be implemented. If there are not, then we should ask our council, I think, to lobby for these powers. At a recent planning committee meeting that I sat on behalf of a few people, I got the impression that the council felt that there were no powers for them to be able to affect this type of planning application.
Well, my feeling is that it would be desirable to have more powers. As I've said, with other council leaders, we have lobbied. In the absence of national powers, we are seeking to do, we are looking at Kensington, and indeed the senior officer who actually deals with this area is present in the room and has heard directly what you would have said, sir. We will try to do what we can to buttress the planning department.
Thank you. Fourth question, lady in row 3.
I'm just a little concerned. I noticed at the start of this year that the taxi rank outside Richmond Station has finally been relocated as it was proposed some time ago. But also, there's a slight confusion of the bus stops. And is this going to be a permanent feature? Because I think it's a serious loss for people coming out of the station. That it's not obvious where the taxis are at all. If you're carrying luggage and you've got children or elderly people, is it going to stay that way? The way it currently is?
The the arrangements at the moment are experimental, so we are, yes, so it is subject to review. But I mean, what I would say is that most people at the moment are pretty happy with the new arrangement. The taxis aren't as good. We're going to try and put some more signage in there to just point people up the hill and say that there is the rank there. But the most important thing, from our perspective, the most important thing is to try and get those bus stops sorted out. So, the problem we have is that the forecourt isn't big enough to accommodate what everybody wants to do on it. So by moving the bus stops up and having 2 bus stops there back, the taxi ranks will just move that to Paradise.
This is your supplementary, right? Yes. Would you like to get the microphone? It's right beside
It is
you.
a very novel thing because for over 30 years the taxis were always there, and at one time, as soon as you came out of the station, you could go right into a taxi. So it seems to be a regressive thing, this experiment.
The essence of what we're trying to do is enhance the arrival at Richmond. So by creating that piazza, I would have to say that it worked well with the taxi rank coming through, but for a lot of people that was inconvenient. And the first thing you see when you step out is a taxi rank. Getting to the bus stop was therefore more difficult, and to some extent a little bit more dangerous. So by creating that piazza, we I think, enhanced the arrival at Richmond.
That's a very brief one. How long was this experimental period in place for?
The experiment itself is 6 months.
Now, I think the gentleman has a related question, is that right? So I'll take that as a second supplementary. And then we'll move to the lady in red.
Attention has been paid to the bus stops on the station side.
Would you hold it a little closer?
And how it will work, we don't yet know. But on the opposite side of the road, the bus stop was moved back a degree. New traffic lights, new pedestrian lights were put in. People getting off the buses react to the traffic lights, not to the pedestrian lights, because there are these lights which are set at sort of 5 feet high, which you can only see from one direction. Consequently, people walk constantly diagonally across the road from the buses to the station, almost regardless of what the traffic lights or the pedestrian lights are doing. We've had these pedestrian lights for some time in Richmond. They, frankly, only operate if you're looking from one particular direction. You can't see them from the other side of the road. You can't see what's going on. They're nothing like as effective as the old green man we used to live with. Could you take that into account when you're examining the effectiveness of the stationary development?
I can certainly take it into account. I'll ask officers to look at it in a minute. Specifically, you're talking about crossing outside RBS. Okay.
Outside spectators in RBS, yes. And it is a health and safety problem.
Okay, thank you. May we move to our next question, Madam, and followed by the gentleman at the back left, and then I shall move to the right-hand side. Thank you, sir. Right.
What is the panel's policy for rough sleepers and their choice of places to live in the borough? I refer to particularly Buccleuch Gardens and the shelter, where there are 4 rough sleepers, have been for over 3 years. There is litter, there is unpleasant smells, there's a dog, there's also now somebody sleeping in the tunnel that goes under the road in Buccleuch Gardens. And it's very unsavoury. It's a shelter for people sheltering from the weather, not for people to live in.
Thank you.
I would have to say that I wasn't aware at that particular point myself, not being a councillor for Richmond, but I mean, I'd certainly take note of the point you raised, yes.
Yes, we do, of course, Commission Spear to provide services for us. And we will, I think, as you're referring to this, it's obviously a very sad case, so we will look and see what can be done. I mean, I wasn't aware of it.
No, I recently visited Spear, and I was impressed by the presentation that they gave, and I'm surprised to hear of what you say. I'll certainly look into it, yes.
Thank you.
I think the gentleman wants to come in again.
Now, have we supplementary from someone who's not spoken yet on the issues of homelessness and rough sleeping? Yes. And then we'll go to you, sir.
There is Vivian Harris, there is a similar problem at Old Deer Park. There's one particular gentleman that's been there for years at least. Now, I think Spear do a fantastic job, but as I understand it, if Spear offer to help and the gentleman in question refuses, there's very little that can be done. Now, I've spoken to some of the Continental team who do the litter picking, and what they tell me is that the council is quite happy, in inverted commas, about this particular homeless person down on Old Deer Park. Frankly, as an individual, I am really concerned about the lack of sanitation. I'm also concerned that he puts out a lot of food, and we get far more rats in evidence on that part of Old Deer Park as a result of the activities of this particular person. So I'm terribly sympathetic, but I think it's a longer term problem that, you know, someone has to do something about.
Okay, again, I take note of that, and I certainly don't think the council's happy. I don't think that would be, the council would not be happy in any way. The council would not be happy that someone is in such a condition of life that they lead, or in some senses choose to lead, but usually have to lead this way of life. No one should be happy about that.
Lord Tripp, sorry, perhaps I used the word happy in the wrong context.
Right.
I said happy in inverted commas.
Okay.
That the council has taken no active position on trying to move him on or stop him sleeping from where he is. So the attitude is that he's harmless enough. He's not doing anyone any harm.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say, if you look at the situation, he's been there for a couple of years. He's now erected a tent actually on Old Deer Park, which I know is contrary to council policy. But you know, there was a view that was expressed by the Continental team that he was harmless. Well, I'm telling you, one should be doing more to support someone like that.
I of course note that. I mean, I'm conscious that we're in a public forum here. This is being web streamed and is visible to anybody, and we have to be careful not to discuss particular individuals. For my own part, I will take note of what you say and what was said before, and we'll talk to our social services people about it. I don't know if anybody wants to add a more local perspective, because I'm talking from the point of view of the Legal Council here rather than local council.
No, I mean, I think this is it. We will have to talk to social services about it. I mean, all I can really say is that I do know from previous incidents, I mean, you know, it have happened over the years since I've been a councillor, and I think Francis probably knows more about this than I do, that it can on occasions be very, very difficult to help people, so it can be a very difficult situation, but we certainly will take it to social services.
One more on this issue, gentleman here, then we'll move to the next question, which is the gentleman at the back. So if we could have the microphone to the back right.
Thank you. Adrian, one suggestion in relation to these, because there's also someone always begging outside Tesco's, and one suggestion would be actually to try and work with maybe some of the tenants in town, such as Tesco's, to actually sort out the issue, because it can't be good for them as well, having someone outside the door every single day. There with a dog and probably sleeping rough by the Thames in the tunnel later on. So that could be an idea.
Very constructive suggestion.
Thank you. Let's now move to our next question. Gentleman in the far corner.
Thank you. The complexity of styles for building alteration planning applications for traditional properties is increasing. When will the London Borough of Richmond upon Thames reinstitute a conservation area advisory group as part of the planning process to assess the suitability of such applications.
I didn't catch exactly what it was that you were asking. I'm really sorry.
It's the creation of the Conservation Area Advisory Group, or the reconstitution of it, with a particular issue in mind. Would you mind giving us the particular issue again, sir?
This is really to do with the complexities of building operations. My background is in architecture. I'm also a town planner and a landscape architect, so maybe I'm too sensitive to specific issues here. This is from the building operations that have been put forward. And there may well be a need for a conservation area advisory group. That's really as simple as that.
Okay.
It's not.
Yeah. So reconstitution of the Conservation Area Advisory Group. Who would like to?
I think one of the conservation areas all have their own unique features, which is taken into consideration very strongly in any planning application. Additionally, we will be having the SPDs as we move across through the village plans. And I think they'll pick up on all the things that you're talking about, which is the key design features, what it is that makes that conservation area so unique. And I think, provided that we continue, as I hope we will, to look at that very closely and take that into consideration when we decide on whether a planning application is suitable or not, then I think we will be fine. But if there are any particular areas in Richmond that you are concerned about, this is the opportunity to feed in when we do the walkabout, when we have the call-in sessions and so on.
Yes, I would just add to that, because I think, you know, this is the opportunity with the supplementary planning documents, because it is then reflecting what the local people in the area actually want to see during the consultation process. And it is, after all, the local people in their area who should be looking and deciding on the character of their area. So that's the benefit of the work we're doing now.
Anyone not spoken yet who has a supplementary question on this? So I think everyone with their hand up has spoken. I think you were first, madam.
There's a lot of emphasis on the conservation of the buildings, but is anybody looking at the appropriateness of some of the council plans, for example, the gardens? Because in my view, for example, terrace gardens, which is sort of Georgian influence, has been spoiled by the introduction of that floral clock thing underneath Old Father Thames, which is actually, I think, dangerous, and for me an eyesore, and also some of the beds there are out of keeping if you're looking at the conservation of a particular kind of feel of the town. I personally think they're expensive and they're out of keeping with the initial style of those particular gardens. And it's costly and, you know, out of keeping.
Well, we have actually done a lot of work in terrace gardens, but yes, I mean, open spaces are and have been right the way through a hugely important part of this council's policies and actually protecting and improving them. But again, during this village planning process, because it's not just about the supplementary planning documents, it's all about, also about the character and what you want to see improved in the area. So there'll be certainly an opportunity to feed in your views about that can be taken back. So yes, I mean it's two processes: the supplementary planning documents, and also what I call the refresh of the village plans and the priorities, and what people want to see improved about their local area, not just the buildings, the open spaces and parks as well.
There is one of my other vices, I'm very interested in garden history and rather like plants, and try to teach my poor first son the Latin names of lots of plants before he was 4, and he's not interested in plants as a result. I mean, I take what you say about, you know, should gardens, does something look too municipal, or should you let, you know, something be very, very natural? I mean, this is the contrast between the argument between the formal and the informal in gardens is something which again is very old. But I think both these things, and the point that the gentleman made in the corner about the complexities of building within, or considering building within conservation areas, they come absolutely to the point of what this is all about, how we live together as a community. Everything that comes before a planning committee reflects an adversarial element there is here. Somebody likes it, somebody doesn't like it, otherwise there wouldn't be a conflict. The purpose of democracy in every institution of it is to try to pull out that conflict. Someone is going to lose because it's like a court of law, someone will lose it. This is broader, and we had very interesting comments about, are we doing too much pastiche? We have to try and get, without going to the lowest common denominator, where we don't do anything daring or unsafe, try to find in areas what is right and what is appropriate. If you look what we've done in the local village plan in Kew, there are 13 or 14 different areas where the local plan picks out specific features in buildings and things which characterise that area, and they're not necessarily a particular period that we can try and preserve. Hopefully we might be able to do some of that from this. I won't comment on the floral clock because I don't want to either please or displease the really amazing people who work so very hard in our gardens. I think our parks and gardens generally are enormous credit to the community and partly make us what we are.
I would like
Someone
to say...
hasn't spoken yet, has a hand up, and I'd like to go to the lady in a dark coat towards the rear, who's a debutante, so to speak.
So I was encouraged to hear that it's the local people who have to decide how the local area will look like and then the character of the local area. There was also an argument in regards to modern design that, sometimes people like it, sometimes people don't like it, but I personally know of cases where everybody seems to like it, but Richmond Council seems not to like it. The question is, who decides and how many opinions do you need to have to decide what is harmful to the local area or enhancing the local area as regards to modern design?
I think it comes back really to the answer I gave before. It isn't a question just of numbers. It is a question of what our local planning policy says. And sometimes, if you look at any planning report, and I've looked at the one for week after next, because it's one that interests me on there, sometimes planning officers will say on balance. And that means there's very often different policies which slightly conflict, and so it really is an on-balance thing, and often then it will come down to the way in which it's presented to planning committee or the way in which it's presented to planning officer, whereas sometimes it's very clear-cut, it just is against our planning policy or it fits well within our planning policy. And so I think it's one of the things that I want to try and do in my role is to try and get people to understand what planning is and work with it rather than against it, because I think one of the most important things in planning is compromise sometimes. And as Lord True said, it can be quite adversarial, which is very different in a way from licensing, where you can take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and come to a compromise. With planning, sometimes it seems a little bit legal and difficult, but often there is a compromise if we can just find it. And I think that's something we need to do, is to try and encourage people to look at what our planning says and work within it, and work with their neighbours, because often we only ever come to planning committee because people haven't spoken to each other. So if I can say anything this evening, I'd encourage you all to talk to each other. And this is what your neighbours say.
What if all the neighbours are supportive of a certain design and there's absolutely no objection, and you still face this objection from the planners?
Well, I think if you've got a particular example of that, then I'm very happy to talk to you about it afterwards and we can have a look at it.
Well, I think
I am familiar with them. I am familiar, so as Councillor speak, we're both quite familiar with the case. And I just want to add that this is another reason for the supplementary planning documents, because it is an opportunity to identify those areas where possibly some modern improvement, could enhance the area.
I'd like now to move to a fresh question. We've given this a good 10 minutes, and let's look at this side. Yes, sir, in the blue jumper.
the removal of excessive street signs and general street clutter in accordance with government circulars?
I'd like to hear the answer.
Okay, the answer is as quickly as I can get around to it, because I am deeply, deeply opposed to excessive street clutter. So I'm conscious of, next to not on the high street, I photographed the other day, there's a pole there with nothing on the top of it. So, I'm going to be asking the officers to get rid of that just as quickly as I can. Likewise, the street signs there, the main road signs on 2 poles, as far as I'm concerned, that could be on 1 pole and therefore not being so obstructed on the pavement. So there are plenty of ways of trying to sort of tidy things up, and the policy is to try and tidy it up just as quickly as we can. And what I would advocate is if you see something, take a photograph of it and send it into the council and ask them to focus on it.
Do you have a supplementary, sir? And I'll come to you. That's fine. So, front row, centre.
I wondered if the pole with nothing on it was actually for a pigeon, which was absent when you took the picture.
Well, the pigeons I know tend to leave things behind. There's no evidence.
It is the council's policy to try to remove. I mean, we don't control things everywhere. You don't want to know we're in Richmond. You don't want to know about East Sheen. But in my ward, suddenly the most gigantic green sign went up, like something off, the M1 to the M6 and off for Birmingham. And that's because, according to TfL regulations, it's it's London strategic highway, so the notice has to be of a particular size. Completely pointless sign, which nobody wants, and a big green sign. There are a lot of boneheaded regulations about signs, which do make life quite difficult for councils.
Any other questions on street clutter? Yes, is this a fresh question? Fresh question. Right, yes, one quickly on street clutter. And then we'll come to you, madam, here. No, okay, we're with you. Third row. Thank you.
I'm sure we're not unique on Richmond Green in having a lot of very mature trees. Would the council consider a little bit more liberal pruning of the trees going forward, because they are beautiful trees but the grass just does not grow beneath the trees, and we've got extensive patches of bare mud and no grass, and I think it's not unique to Richmond Green. But I think if we could just have a little bit more systematic and more liberal pruning of the trees, it would definitely help enhance the village greens.
Okay, yeah, I take this absolutely on board. We're actually in the process of about to approve, when it goes to Cabinet later this month, next month, a new tree policy. It's really just a sort of modified tree policy, but it is, I think it will have that little bit more flexibility. But I'll take that back to Craig our tree officer, that we need to look at that. I thought the trees in Richmond Green were actually pruned pretty regularly, but no, right, what you're saying not. So I will certainly take that point back, and I will mention it. Absolutely.
Are these tree related, or any tree related supplementaries? No. Okay, madam, fresh question.
Thank you. We have touched on this at the beginning of the meeting, and something that really concerns me. This is the lack of cycle paths along the towpath and in the parks. And I think it's got to be taken seriously. I would suggest that we need designated cycling paths to protect our children, to protect elderly people, babies and prams. You walk along the river, and it is lethal, and it's accidents waiting to happen. So I know we touched on it briefly, but I think that it is a priority.
I'm afraid I just had to reiterate what I said before, is that we don't have almost the legal right to allow people to cycle there. So on that basis, we can't create a path forward. But as Lord True reminded me, the TfL has an interest in creating a quiet way between Kew and Mortlake, and on that basis, cycling would have to be allowed there. So I'm not sure, the officers are meeting with TfL later this month, but I'm not sure what the plan is for that, and I would be finding out.
I'm not against cycling. I just think it should be made safe.
I'm not against cycling either, but I am concerned, as you are, with cyclists getting too fast down there when I'm walking the dog, and the dog runs in front of the cyclist. It's a problem. So, but it isn't one that I can solve.
There is a behavioural issue here too. I mean, I'm another role line on board of the Royal Parks, and in Richmond Park, it's a very constant complaint we get of yes, we very much welcome cyclists, but sometimes they're selfish about the interrelation with pedestrians and being polite. And, solving that conundrum is quite difficult. Ultimately, people have to respect each other.
I think it's an accident. There are accidents waiting to be happening.
We just have time for one more question. I'd like to see if there's someone who's not spoken at all tonight. And may I say, my colleagues on the panel will be happy to take contact details if there's an issue you've not been able to have tackled this evening in the plenary session. Now, the first timer, yes sir, just here. And I think this will be our last question of the night.
Thank you. The Mortlake Brewery site will be developed soon. What is the council doing to protect that for public use? Already the International Bowls Green has gone under concrete and has got housing on it. Will you allow the rest of the brewery site just to be expensive housing?
Well, I'll let Councillor Chapel answer that, but I strongly resisted the loss of the Bowling Green site and campaigned against it, and unfortunately that was before I was in a position of authority. We've had a major consultation in Mortlake, and there is a planning brief for the site in existence to which any developer will be held. Councillor Chapel wants to add to that.
I think it's the same with any of these significant sites. We want to make them work for the borough residents, and it's absolutely vital that we do listen to what you want for the site. I'm completely honest, I live on Twickenham side. I don't know the site very well, but I can assure you that our officers will work very closely with any developer to make them aware of the aspirations of local people. And of course it will have to sit within our plans, and it isn't going to be a question of anything goes. It is a very significant site, and one that will work very closely with local residents, officers and developers to make sure we get it right.
I mean, there is a deposited brief which is there and published, and the council has no plans to alter that, but obviously if in this kind of process people would like to see different things considered in the context of that plan, we can look at it, but it was one of the first things that I had the council set to when became leader was to carry through public discussions and get a brief established for that brewery site. It's the most important strategic site in the borough, potentially.
May I just add that we're also doing this village planning SPD process in Mortlake at the moment, so there has been an opportunity for people who live there to comment as well on village planning during this process.
But if you've got any further comments, then please let us know what they are, because you know the site a lot better than I do.
Now, if we're very quick, we can squeeze one more question in, and the gentleman right at the back who's not spoken at all this evening, there he is.
It was just a quick question about the Rugby World Cup coming to Richmond. Is there a way in which we can make sure residents benefit from not just the games, but I think there's a festival with the rugby as well?
There is a festival. We have to acknowledge that a lot of people come here, come from South Africa, and a lot of games in South Africa and Twickenham are going to stick around. So yes, there are plans for festival, entertainment and other things. We're back to the balance point, dealing with the people that come, making sure they come here and remember the borough favourably without putting it up too much of a burden, but there is a very active committee working with the RFU and other agencies, and this is all breaking out into public discussion over the next few months. If you want to look at it,
well, I only wanted to add that we have got consultations with businesses and with residents, and obviously we do, as the truth says, we want people to come and really enjoy Richmond and Twickenham and Witten, you should really be them, and when they do come, and that we want our businesses to benefit as well as everyone else, and to have it to make it a very, very welcoming and wonderful occasion for everyone.
A lot of people will come to Richmond, and we're trying to cater for them. We will be considering ways to cater for them. We have to accept that they will come, and we can't take away they come across the world to come to the Rugby World Cup. But this is a big item on my agenda, I can assure you.
Any supplementary comment of a very brief nature on the World Cup?
I was just
Yeah.
going to say, obviously, I'm a local resident, and obviously we benefited from the Olympics coming to the borough, and I think the year before the Queen came to the borough as well. So one of the things most people like about these events is the volunteers. I think with the Olympics, volunteers made the games, so hopefully there will be a good team of volunteers for the borough.
Yes, the ER 2015 in the awful jargon, or was it ER 2015? With the Rugby World Cup, people have already themselves, I think, dealt with the volunteer process, so unfortunately the council hasn't had a specific input there.
No, although I mean, I hope, just like the Olympics, we had our own sort of local people as well who helped, and I'm sure that Andrew will be looking at that for the World Cup as well.
Thank you very much indeed. We began the week with Apple posting astonishing profits by devising gadgets for people to speak to each other while avoiding being in the same room. And it was a very good week to reassert how important it is to have real flesh and blood encounters, especially between the electorates and those who represent them. So thank you to all of you for coming tonight, and thank you to all of our panel, Duke Street's own staff, and our council officers who've been serving us so well tonight as well. I think a round of applause.
Thank you.
The residents' briefing for the Rugby World Cup here is on the 23rd of March at the Adult Community College.
Thank you. Travel safely.